All right, so how's everybody doing? I've got a recent acquisition I want to talk about a little bit about today. This is a Ricoh KR-10 Super. This is the budget version of the top-of-the-line XR7. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those two cameras, compare them, and talk about the lineage and background of this camera just a little bit. So the KR-10 Super versus the XR7. The XR7 was the top-of-the-line model at the time the KR-10 Super was introduced. The KR-10 Super was the budget version, and these are the features which were deleted. There was a depth of field preview lever. On the XR7, you had a depth of field preview lever right here that has been deleted from the KR-10 Super. Multiple exposure button. On the back of the XR7 right here, you had a button that said ME for multiple exposure. That was deleted on the KR-10 Super. Auto exposure lock button. On the XR7 there was an auto exposure lock button. I believe it was right here, which allowed you, when you held down that button, it held your exposure, and then you could recompose and take a photograph. It's kind of an important feature on an aperture priority camera, I think, but it's just my opinion. And an aperture window for viewfinder display. So in the XR7 there was a little window right up under here, right just under the nameplate right here, which reflected the aperture and displayed it in the viewfinder, and that is missing on this camera. It was also kind of a bummer. Personally, I'm a fan of full information viewfinders. I like that, but this is the budget version. So this was preceded by a camera simply called the KR-10. And I believe that the KR-10 was the budget version of the XR2, which was the flagship Ricoh SLR prior to the XR7. You getting that? Everybody following me here? So this is, let me show you my other Ricoh camera. So this is my other Ricoh camera, or one of my other Ricoh cameras. I actually have 3 of these things now. Well, this is my other Ricoh K-mount camera. And to make matters more confusing, Ricoh private labeled a lot of their cameras to the Sears department store chain in the United States. And this was one such camera which was sold by Sears under their own label. You see the Sears label here. So this is an XR1, privately labeled as a KS1000 for the Sears department store chain. Its stablemate was the XR2. This camera was all mechanical, all manual. The XR2 offered aperture priority automation, although it was built on the same chassis. And I believe the budget version of the XR2 was the KR-10. And then when this camera and the XR2 were superseded by the XR7 in 1981, then this camera at some point subsequent thereto, or contemporaneous therewith, I'm not sure which, was introduced as the budget version of the XR7. I hope that's not too complicated, but that's as simple as I can make it. Again, to make matters even more confusing, the XR7 was also sold as the Sears KS2, and the KR-10 Super was also sold as the Sears KSX Super. So the nomenclature on these Ricoh cameras of the 1980s can be a little bit confusing. In fact, I think there may have been 1 or 2 other models using the initials XR10. There may have been like an XR10X or XR10S or something like that. I'm really not 100% sure. But in this video, I'm talking about strictly the KR-10, the KR-10 Super. Not the KR-10, not the KR-10S, not the KR-10X or KR-10 anything else. KR-10 Super, that's all I'm talking about. And this camera is very small and lightweight. It is extremely compact. It is really, it's noticeably light. It is noticeably lighter than the predecessor generation from the XR1, XR2. You can take a look and see. I don't know how well you can see that, but yeah, you can see that this is the newer one, and it is lighter and smaller. I don't know how well you can see the size comparison there. but it most certainly is. No, anyway, but it is noticeably lighter and smaller than its predecessor. So if we take a look at the dimensions are, here we go, 136 by 86 by 51 millimeters, and a weight of 460 grams. We compare that to the Olympus OM1, which was the gold standard for compact SLRs of the era, of the manual focus era. The dimensions are 136 by 83 by 50, so that's pretty close. Pretty close. The KR-10 Super is just a wee bit bigger, but it is lighter, presumably because at 460 grams versus 510 grams, again, presumably because the KR-10 Super is almost entirely all plastic, whereas the Olympus OM1 used a great deal of metal. And this is just, well, Ricoh went all plastic when they switched to the K-mount. I've talked about that before in a prior video. But it appears to work, it appears to function. I did have a little bit of trepidation about this camera simply because about, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, in an interview with Nico Yacera, the gentleman from Camera Rescue at the time, Yuho, I believe, mentioned that 90% of all Ricoh SLRs coming into their shop were arriving non-functional and could not be repaired. 90%, that is a 90% failure rate, which kind of shocked me and certainly gave me second thoughts about acquiring this. But this one appears to work. So what does that tell you? It could be that the design of these cameras is inherently flawed, and this thing will fail on me with, you know, with a roll of film in it in the very near future. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that the Ricoh cameras failed due to lack of quality control, and the fact that this one has lasted all this time means that, you know, it was one of the good ones, and you know, it'll just keep on working. So who knows? I don't know the answer to that, but I am a little nervous about the reliability of this camera, but I just got it. I haven't even put a roll of film through it yet. It is all electronic. It does not offer any mechanical shutter speeds whatsoever. In fact, there's no mechanical interface between this dial and the shutter. It's all electronic. You can tell that because it spins all the way around, 360 degrees without stopping in either direction. You can spin it this way, you can spin it this way, the whole way around, no stopping. Not a problem. You got the index mark here for the shutter speeds. L simply stands for lock. You put an L and L to lock out the shutter so it doesn't trip under any circumstances. A for automatic exposure. B for bulb, which is you know, the shutter stays open for as long as you depress the button. 16 seconds. That's a bit of a rarity. There aren't too many cameras of the manual focus era with dials like this that timed out to 16 seconds. So if you do long exposure photography, that is an advantage on this camera. Maximum shutter speed is 1/1000th. It has a vertically traveling stainless steel copal square shutter, so the X-sync is 1/125th of a second. You can see that marked in red. It's got a fairly short advanced stroke, which is kind of nice. Fires. Here's your frame counter window. This is your ASA or ISO and exposure compensation dial. That is, you lift this to set the film sensitivity, which on this camera is measured in ASA, which stands for American Standards Association. That was later updated very shortly after this camera was introduced. At some point in the 1980s, ASA became ISO, which stands for International Standards Organization. But you lift this ring and turn to change the ASA setting. If you can see the index marker moving as I lift and turn. If you turn without lifting, then you are changing the exposure compensation settings. You're affecting the same mechanism within the camera, but you're simply interfacing with it differently. You know, exposure compensation can be done simply by jiggling with the ASA settings as well. So that's what this does here. There's your self-timer button. On the front of the camera, we've got This is interesting. On most of these electronic cameras of this era, in order to get a reading in the viewfinder, you sort of have pressed the shutter button. On this camera, you have a dedicated button up here, which you simply press like so, in order to activate the viewfinder information. On the bottom of the camera, we've got the release button for rewinding the film. That is the coupling for an auto winder. There was an auto winder available for this camera. I do not have it, but there was one available. Tripod mount, and the battery door. It takes two either LR44 alkaline or SR76 silver oxide 1.5 volt batteries, which is again very standard for the time period. And to open the back, you lift up on the rewind crank like so. Again, very typical of that period. Inside the camera, you can see this is nice and clean. You can see that stainless steel cobalt square shutter right there. You can see a multi-slotted take-up spool and the film chamber here. Yeah, no, this is fairly typical of cameras of this era. Nothing too remarkable. Does not have a memo holder on the back. That's kind of a bummer. By the 1980s, most cameras, even budget models, had a memo holder on the back, so you can figure out what kind of film you're shooting. Here's the lens release button right there. You press that down to release the lens. Right? Right? Yes, right. Okay, there we go. So yeah, you do like so. And to mount the lens, you see that red dot there. Line up that red dot with that red dot right there. And turn a quarter turn like so, and there you go, you've mounted your lens. So Ricoh SLRs tend to be fairly inexpensive. They're not, there's not exactly a huge fan club for this brand. It was a budget brand, but they made, well, I don't know. I'm not going to swear for the quality of the equipment they made in the 1980s, not without getting out in the field and testing this thing a little bit first. But this, I did actually happen to find this. Well, I didn't find it with this lens, but I acquired it at the same time I acquired this lens, which is a nice one, the Pentax 50mm f1.4. So here's a question for you. Which takes better pictures? A Ricoh KR-10 Super with a Pentax 50mm f1.4 or a K1000 with the same lens? You know the answer. Doesn't matter. The lens makes the picture. The camera is just a box. And this box is a lot less expensive than a K1000 on the secondhand market. Although again, I am concerned about its reliability. I'm very concerned about the long-term reliability of this camera. But you know, given the, I think I paid $30, $40 for this thing. Maybe not even that. Maybe 25. I don't remember exactly. But it was not expensive. So for that price, I figured, well, you know, it's worth taking a chance. The viewfinder. It has a very nice, clean viewfinder. And here I'm going to show you some of the high-end graphics which you're accustomed to on my channel. Here you go. High-end graphics. So you look through the viewfinder, you've got a microprism collar surrounding a split image rangefinder. And on Ricoh, the split image rangefinder is at an angle. On every other brand that I can think of, I don't think any other brand does this, the split image rangefinder is flat. It's at it's parallel with the horizon. But on Ricoh cameras, they put it at a 45-degree angle, and a lot of people like that, and it is actually pretty convenient as a focusing aid. And then the rest of it is obviously the ground glass. On the right-hand side, you've got the shutter speeds labeled from 1/1000th to 1. It doesn't go all the way up to 16. And then, as you adjust the lens, you see a black bar move up and down. The black bar mimics the needle displays in older cameras, but it's actually a liquid crystal display black bar. So it just sort of moves seamlessly, well not seamlessly, moves in half-stop increments up and down the display to show you which shutter speed the camera is going to use. Although, like most aperture priority cameras of the period, and today for that matter, the shutter is stepless. So just because the bar is here doesn't mean that you're shooting exactly between 500 and 250. It could be any, you know, if the bar is right here like so, then you could be shooting at any fractional speed between 250 and 500. But it displays in half-stop increments, and it's actually quite smooth, and it's very convenient. On the XR7, but not the KR-10 Super, you've got a window down at the bottom which reflects the aperture in use. So that's a really nice feature, which is on the XR7, but does not appear in the KR-10 Super. Okay, so that's a little information about this camera. They're not that uncommon. You can still find these things on the secondhand market, and they're not terribly expensive. Although honestly, nowadays, I mean, any functioning 35mm SLR is getting up there in price. So it's worthwhile to know where the bargains are. And again, I still have my trepidations about recommending this camera. Number one, I haven't used it yet. I've yet to put a roll of film through it. This is a brand new acquisition for me. And secondly, I'm very concerned about the remarks by the folks at Camera Rescue regarding the reliability of the electronics on these cameras. I'm very concerned about that. But I spent my $25 or $30, whatever it was, and took my chances. And let's see what this thing can do. It's I mean, I've got the XR1, which is a perfectly good camera, which does have, I love this, the aperture direct readout window, which is a nice feature. Though it's a nicer feature on a camera with a functioning light meter, which this does not have. So this lacks a functioning light meter, but it's all mechanical, doesn't need a battery, which is what I like about it, Copal square shutter. Although it is, it's nice to just set your aperture and shoot sometimes. So I will keep you posted, and you can look forward to a more detailed review of this camera at some point in the not terribly distant future, I hope. So that's what I got for you today. If you have experience with this camera, please do leave your comments and thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this video, you found it interesting, amusing, informative, any of the above, please do like and subscribe. And as always, check out the links down below. Take care now. Bye-bye.